Right.
Okay, we are live. This is the Senate Education Committee, March 12th. And today we are healing from kind of rounding out. So we continue to do preparatory work for I think the larger education reform bill coming in front of us. One of the goals, I guess, in the sort of testimony we've had today has been we actually heard from a couple of, they call themselves small T therapeutic schools, Rock Point and others, and we've wanted to hear from a couple of capital T therapeutic schools and really get a sense of your role in the system, just so we have that in our bank of knowledge as we proceed through the rest of the process. So why don't we think of all three of you as being together at the head of the table, even though it's on video, and just you can either, I don't know if you want to each go a little bit separately about your schools. You're probably going to want to do that. So, but why don't we introduce all three of you at once? But before we do that, we'll introduce ourselves to you because we haven't had any of you here before. So missing there, and she may be able to come in, is Senator Ron Himsdale from Tiffany County in the NDC then.
Hi, I'm Connor Ishing from Windham County.
Good afternoon, Dave Weeks, Rutland County.
Seth Longus from the Bennington Senate District.
Terry Williams, Rutland District.
Steve Heberton, Addison County District.
So now you three introduce yourselves.
Sure. I'm Martha Tucker. I'm the Director of Education at Maple Hill School and Park.
And tell us where's Maple Hill?
Maple Hill is in Plainfield, Vermont.
Plainfield. Okay.
And my name is Joe Astick. I'm the Executive Director at the Maple Hill School.
Okay.
Yep.
And Drew?
Hi, I'm Drew Gradinger. I am the director of the Kindle Farm School, and we are also part of a designated agency, HCRS, and I'm fortunate enough to sit on the leadership team of that designated agency. Kindle Farm is in Newfane and Townsend, Vermont, and we serve 48 students that identify as male.
Okay. Well, why don't we start here at the head of the table, and then we'll move to Drew. So why don't you tell us about your school, the services you provide, how you fit into the overall system. So we'll just give you the floor to talk to us.
Well, I'll start with a little bit of that background and history of Maple Hill. So Maple Hill was established in 1966 in Plainfield. And it started then and existed for about 20 years to serve the students or kids and families of Central Vermont mainly. And so for that 20 years from 1966 to about the late 80s, it existed as a group of about seven group homes throughout the state. And so in the late 80s, they made the shift to become a licensed independent school. I think that became effective about 1989 for the first time. So back then, the history says, these small group homes, residential group homes, would just have the students come for the day. So kids in foster care would go and be part of the local schools, and send them down to the school for the days. So it's made a big shift from in about 1989 and became a licensed independent day school for Vermont. So which started out, serving, the first class was one, its humble beginnings has grown to about 24, 25 students currently, which is about, currently we're at about our operating sweet spot. So it's grown over that time from one campus to three separate campuses. We serve students that all qualify on IEPs or 504s. And serve students currently from 8 different supervisory unions throughout Central and Eastern Vermont. So we're finding like there's a little bit of a vacuum, especially in the Northeast Kingdom, and not a lot of services for the kids that need something different than what the public schools are able to give them. quite plainly put. We work, you know, as you said, at the Capital P Therapeutic Schools. You know, we get our kids referred through all the public school districts, and quite plainly, we work with the kids with the highest set of needs. The kids that it's not just the school, but have social emotional needs, academic needs, support needs. You know, really need an intensive environment to be successful. So we are kind of on that continuum. And I did listen to the testimony from CJ and Sergio from the other day, that kind of the continuum. And I kind of thought about, like, you know, he was like, yeah, we're serving the kids on this end. That small T therapeutic is, you know, the students that are, you know, a lot of the private pay kids, or students that, you know, just need a little extra special, smaller environment. Our students are on the other end of the kind of the continuum, to say this is in some ways kind of that last stop for students, to say if they weren't at Maple Hill, then more than likely their next step would be like an out-of-state placement or residential placement. So that's kind of where we have put ourselves and identified with LEA. So like where we learn, you know, where we live in the students that we serve on that continuum. So yeah.
So you are a day school.
We are a day school. Yeah, we follow, you know, 176 school days. We do have a short summer program for students as well. But yeah, we generally follow the public school calendar. So we
And do most of your students that live close enough to go home at night?
they do. All of them, yeah. That was the big change that happened back in the late 80s. So it is a day program. So all of our students are bused through local taxi systems. And in some local cases, I think sometimes the parents bring them to school. But yeah, with students that drive, as long as, you know, as far as 1 hour in one direction to get to Maple Hill, especially for the students like the Northeast Kingdom, where there's not a lot of other options. It's worth it. You know, that's age group, what they need to do. What's that? Age group. So we started as ages or grades 7 through 12. And then, you know, what we found in the last 35 years of operating the school is just a lot of the LEA saying there is this underserved population of the, you know, upper elementary students. So 2.5 years ago, we're just finishing our third complete school year, but we started a program for essentially 4th through 7th grade in upper elementary school. So, you know, that is part of our program with a long waiting list. And, you know, it's for the kind of school, like, we need to stay small. Really, that is kind of the magic that really happens for us, is the students that need relationships with adults, you know, a smaller environment, you know, and that special attention that we're able to give them throughout their day. So
I want to talk a little bit about a little bit more about the students and some about the staffing and the capital T. So most of our students are unable to work in any kind of a pairing or trio when they come to us. So the reason they come to us is that there are no more options locally for them. They've run out of options with everything that their local schools have tried. And sometimes they go to programs that are funded by schools that are off campus. Like there are a couple programs like that in Berry City. But when kids cannot be served in any of those arrangements, then prior to going into more expensive, more restrictive, usually residential placement, they are referred to a school like Maple Hill, where we're staffed to provide them individualized educational opportunities throughout their whole day. Some students can work in a pair or a trio. There is group things that happen, but students are staffed well enough so that they can get the input that they need from the adult, even in larger settings, so that they can get help keeping their behavior under control. The majority of the students carry a disability category of either emotional disturbance or autism spectrum disorder. And what characterizes all of them really is that they are unable to regulate their own reactions to situations. So they they are more reactive than other students, and they either escalate to a point of, I want to say severe acting out unless someone can support them prior to that, or sometimes they shut down and just sleep. So a kid sleeping through the day could be that they were up all night gaming, but it also could be that their life is in distress, and that's the only way they can manage. So the majority of the students have also experienced significant trauma. So a couple of students, a few students come from intact families where there's, healthy family relationships, but they have blown out of their schools, so to speak. But the majority of our students have experienced really severe trauma, sort of the least of which might be domestic violence, but they themselves have often experienced sexualized violence, physical violence, hunger, generational poverty. So they don't come with a toolbox of skills that will keep them safe and productive. So there are two parts to our program that are really tightly integrated. One is the educational part of our program, and the other is the therapeutic part of our program, and they don't operate distinctly from one another for the most part. So all of our staff have ongoing training on how to help students regulate, how to help them engage when, presented with an option, and their, typical response is no way, Jose. So there's pretty heavy staffing with lots of ongoing training. So even to have the same level of staffing in a different environment, like say, off to the side of a public school, typically doesn't allow for the staff to have the intensity of training and support that we provide, which is daily throughout the day. So there are people whose job it is to help the staff do their best work, I would say. And the other part of our program is the educational program, which is a proficiency-based program that is based on the state and national standards, but the indicators of progress are very individualized. So the majority of our students don't learn comfortably in a classroom environment. They might work well in a tutoring environment, or in their initial stages when they're still building relationships and understanding that they can learn and how they learn. They might learn math in a wood shop, or they might learn about fractions from, a musical score. So it's very, very diverse how they are educated. Part of our support network is a social emotional network. We have a therapist on staff who provides therapy, but also interfaces with off-campus therapists. And we have 3 social workers, 3 master's level social workers, one of whom is the therapist. But each of the 3 campuses have a position called a dean, and the dean's role is really a social working role and overseeing social emotional wellness within the program. Something that characterizes our school, and I don't know enough about Kimball Farm to know if we're the same or different, but we're not a hands-on school, so we don't use physical management for students when they're out of control. That happens maybe once every couple of years if a student is dangerous to themselves or dangerous to others, but people are very seasoned and well-trained at anticipating, the possibility of a physical response on the part of students, and they know how to prevent that from happening. So we're very heavily reliant upon building strong relationships between the adults and the students. I would say our students move we intentionally move our students towards something productive after they leave our school, which could be after 4 years, but it also could be on their 22nd birthday. And so for us, the continuum is helping them to learn that we're a safe place, that bad things won't happen to them, and that They can count on the adults to be there for them in all the ways that they need to. And it's only when that happens that they can start to learn. And so when they start to learn, a lot of what they're working on, a lot of what we're working on is understanding how they learn, what the conditions need to be so that they can maximize their own growth, their cognitive growth, their emotional growth. And so there's this whole learning to learn period, which can be long, like 2 or 3 years for a student. But it's through that their interests and their confidence begin to emerge so that they can take a risk and say, yeah, I do want to go to the tech center. And we can say, okay, so this is what it looks like if you're getting ready to go to the tech center. And they can begin to buy into somebody else's expectations. Or we have a student right now who really wants to go to college and she really wants to be a writer. And so we're encouraging her in the direction of CCB courses, which, really take away a lot of the pressure of learning in a group, the classroom. We have kids who learn on work sites. We have kids who get a job that they, improve upon and they stay in it after graduation. So that's a very quick soup to nuts. What did I forget?
That was great.
Hang on for a minute, let's let Drew, how do you pronounce your last name? Drew?
Yeah, good luck with that. My last name is Gradinger.
Wait, okay.
Yeah, so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, just thank you so much for being curious and allowing us to speak to therapeutic schools. I really appreciate the opportunity. So Kindle Farm has been in existence since 1996. It started as an after-school program with a van and 7 kids. And we had a relationship-based model with pretty strong supervision and mentorship. And within just several years, most local districts, Brattleboro to Bellows Falls, were pretty interested in what we were doing. And we became an approved independent school just a year later after that inception. It's fun to hear Maple Hill talk about their programming. There is so much we share. So I think things maybe a little distinction because there is a gamut of therapeutic options with this big T. Kindle Farm is attached to a mental health designated agency. We did not start under that umbrella. It was an independent, unique organization, but we've been part of HCRS for the last at least 14 years. And that has added to what we do, but not replaced. So similar to what Maple Hill was talking about, we serve kids grades 3 to 12 who are pretty high acuity. We work with 15 districts. Our max drive is about an hour and 20 minutes, similar. We work with districts in Windham, Windsor, and Bennington counties. We also work with districts in Cheshire and Sullivan counties in New Hampshire. I think that's just important to state. All of our students identify as male when they enter the school. And so 3rd grade through 12th, which includes 21 for kids in IEPs and things. 100% of our student bodies are currently on IEP. We have had 504 students, but that's fairly rare. So this high acuity, similar to Maple Hill talked about, can often present in one of 2 ways, or all of the above. But a high acuity kid that can be dysregulated can often be unsafe and emotionally charged, fairly volatile presentation when they're not doing well. But more and more, we also see high acuity student be more non-engaged, high truancy, uh, difficulty attending school, or when they're in school engaging in class. So I think that's similar to what we've heard described. Uh, because we are attached to it. So I think what you'll find in all of our therapeutic schools is a therapeutic milieu that's designed to support these students with high acuity and mental health struggles. And we do that by first establishing relationship and trust and safety. That allows the brain to kind of replace cortisol and adrenaline with oxytocin and all the chemicals that allow for our brains to function and to increase skill acquisition and uptake. Because if kids are in a fight or flight mode, that cannot happen no matter how good you are. So trust and safety is where this starts. And so we could talk about ways we do that in questioning time, but I think it's also important that at Kindle Farm and HCRS that we kind of work across the continuum, because HCRS has crisis services, has really profound services for folks with developmental disabilities. We're able to do wraparound work with these different departments of HCRS as a unified agency that has been a boon to our existence since we've become one organization. Just a couple more things about Kindle Farm. We're currently serving 48 students. We have 12 students in like elementary grades 3 to 6. We have 12 students in middle school grades, 6, 7, 8, sometimes 9. And then we have 24 students in high school. And I think the final thing to say, to kind of keep it brief and have this be more interactive, though, is that we have kind of 2 missions at Kindle Farm. There's a lot going on for a kid that comes to Kindle Farm. I think that this trajectory is very important to understand. So in order to qualify for special education in Vermont, a student has to be behind grade level at least 2 years. So the student has been struggling for quite a while to determine they're behind grade level 2 years. Then there's a host of testing and do they qualify? For our students, the answer is always a yes. And then the public school has, with extra dollars, extra supports, extra team members, come up with a plan to serve that student. And the student has broken through that plan at least once, most likely more than once. So those students are coming to our schools feeling like failures, not trusting adults, not seeing schools as safe places, not enjoying learning. And so our mission is to change that. When they come to us, we have 2 missions. One, and I guess preferable is not exactly right, but one mission is that we get kids reskilled. We get them to feel safe by developing relationships, helping them acquire skills so that they can see themselves as learners and see adults as supporters. And then they can take that back to public school, where they have class offerings we cannot offer, where they are not removed from their community to be successful. In our school, where there's girls and people not like themselves, there are a host of opportunities in the public school system, and we are charged with getting them ready for those environments, if appropriate, in a less restrictive environment. Very important. Not all kids are going to qualify for that and be able to do that based on their circumstances and based on when we get them. So we have a second mandate, which is if kids aren't going back to the public school system, that we get them ready for life. We offer diplomas. We have a transitional program. We offer job placements. The last 5 years, all of our kids have left with job shadows, job placements, and things like that. So we're really have a two mission to get kids to acquire skills, whether that's to go back to public school or be successful in the larger world after school. I think that's a good introduction. Thank you.
So one thing, let's ask one question to get things started. But you have one school with 45 and you've got 25 kids over 3 campuses. There must be something different about the way that you run it. So you talked about kids needing very small environments, and yet you're running something a little bit different.
So I can speak to that. Maybe I'll start with that. I think I hear some cool questions in there. So all of our classes are a size of 6 students. At our elementary presently, there's 5 adults in that class for 6 students. When you get to the middle school, it's all of our classes are 6 students. When you get to our middle school, and this is not like a dogma, we base it on who we have, but right now we have 3 adults for 6 kids in our middle school, and in our high school, we are able to get that down to 2, occasionally 3 staff for those 6 kids. So I think we share some breaking this up into small groups and having enough adults with skills to, we have this idea of like when a kid is dysregulated, we take them off the heat. We're not going to help a kid acquire a regulation skill or an academic skill when they're mad and the brain is in fight or flight. So the first thing we do is get the kids down by supporting them, by taking breaks, by being kind to them, by power sharing. But once we get that, then we look at accountability and safety and try to reskill maybe what it is they're missing. So typically you see a kid kind of become dysregulated when they are missing a skill that comes before this dysregulation. So it's our job to analyze why it is they're spiking and help them to build skills prior to the spike so that we kind of keep removing antecedent triggers so kids can kind of access the skills that we're doing in the academics.
So
I don't know if Maple Hill wants to talk about how we differ, because I know that you even operate in smaller groups than we do.
sounds like I'm just trying to go through a little bit. It sounds like or doing a little bit more like classes, and you're maybe a little bit more like all. Is that correct?
If that's what's necessary, all schools have the option of classes. What we found with the younger students is that they can be the hardest group because local school districts try to hold on to kids as long as they possibly can. So if they're not able to successfully educate a 4th grader to the point that they want that 4th grader to be out of the school, that 4th grader is really struggling. They're very, very difficult to educate. And when we designed this school, we thought it would be a small group program, but that's been hard to accomplish because, as I say, schools will hold on to kids if they can educate them in a small group or in a classroom set aside for them. Our goal always is to get them into a group, but at our younger campus, they have lunch together and they have morning meeting together and they go on recreation together, but most of the students are not able to work together to learn math or reading, for example. And with the older students, I think one of the issues, so we have a program that we have referred to over time as our small group program. And again, the intention is that students will work in combinations of 2 to 5, but teachers have actually found the disparity in achievement to be great enough that they're wanting to work with smaller groups in order to address that more accurately. Because it may have been made clear, but one of the characteristics of the students at both of our schools is that they've experienced significant learning loss. So either they just haven't come to school for long periods of time, or they came to school when they hadn't gotten any sleep the night before because bad things were happening in the home, or they come to school and they're too hungry, or bad things were going on at home when you were learning how to sound out words with short vowels. And, by the time they were moving on to other types of reading, that was gone and they hadn't learned it. So we have, 7th, 8th, 9th graders who really can't read. So what we have found is that we can work in small groups for certain activities and with certain kids, but to make that the overriding requirement, we wouldn't realize the success with our students that we're experiencing.
With this,
I wasn't asking for that reason.
yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't figure out the part that at all. I'm just trying to understand the way
Yep.
people do it.
Yeah.
It does. And over the years, it does ebb and flow. If we do have certain age groups at the same grade level, we'll be able to have a small group and work effectively. But when you have a 12th grader doing math at a 2nd grade level, and sometimes it can be difficult.
I can concur that when someone refers an elementary aged child to Kindle Farm, they need support in ways that is pretty intensive and has made us better over time. That's for sure. And we really try to use a universal. We also have this in a class of 6, especially at our high school, the breadth is pretty large. So in a class of 6 at a high school age group, they're not segregated by grade or even ability. Because you can have a 12th grader at a 3rd grade reading level, you can have a 10th grader at a 9th grade reading level. And so they're largely grouped in ways where we don't have all the same profile in one room. But we don't have any requirement that they have to have the same kind of educational profile at all, based on our UDL model, which is Universal Design Model.
So Senator Ron.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I have to go after this and work on a bill, but I just heard wonderful things about your programs, evident here today. And I think one of the questions we'll need to know moving forward, one of the answers at least is, what would help you all continue to be successful in your work? What could we do that would harm your current progress with students in this reform proposal? And do you have ideas on either growing your programs to serve more students or ways to replicate this model that we should be thinking about?
That's three great questions. I think replicating is the greatest question, because I always wonder, why doesn't the public school just do this? Why can't they have a small program off the side? And some definitely have varying versions of their own, in-house programs. Like, why don't these small independents just partner with the local schools and connect with the public school districts and work more, kind of hand in hand? That's a really complex question. It's almost as diverse as the answer is almost as diverse as the kids that we serve. To say there's one answer because kids not coming to school because anxiety disorders, or the kids not coming because there's family, substance abuse, and I think that as much as I understand that it would make sense economically for schools to be able to, have and keep the kids in house. I think there is this disparity in the public schools. They're trying to serve them all. Let's keep them all together and do this, and which is a beautiful part of the public school system. And there are always going to be the kids in the cracks that just don't fit. Doesn't matter how much they do, and if it's training, the resources right now, of special educators, well-trained, the shortage in mental health, profession that crossover into field, into education as well. Knowing, what's holding it back, knowing that these small public school, private schools are still, also competing for resources of the public schools, for, qualified special educators and getting the best educators that we can to support the kids. And it's, so it is definitely, a scary mentality and the resources for that too. And, and that part is, there is enough room to have both. It is really important that these smaller independent schools will be able to be this relationship forward. When I just need to sit down with you and do something not in a classroom and not around my peers, like there are environments that are really hard to replicate in that public school where that mindset is, let's get them all back together. Let's better together kind of idea. But I do believe that is, those are some of those boundaries. And I think that's why, since the late 60s and being an independent school is they have a waiting list. The schools are just like, we have a great kid for you. We just don't have the resources to serve them the way they need to be served. It's missing a lot of school. And we can, and we have the resources to get in our car and knock on the door in the morning and say, hop in, we're going to school.
Yeah.
Like, would a public school ever have the resources, the diversity, they have so much to take care of. So we can really, that's kind of that makes it special. And it's really hard to replicate that. And it's not also easily scalable. I think that there's this unending, well of people that are really willing to do the hard work, that comes with a high level of training and passion. It takes special people to do it. And I realized there is that limiting factor, even with, in around 40, some employees, like finding, developing them, taking care of them, folks that are working with some of the hardest kids, is definitely tough work and it's not for everybody. And, it's that's a barrier, that comes up across as a barrier as well. Sometimes, are we tapping the human resources in our areas again? How much do we want to compete with some of these really high quality, really great caring people that can also have a role in public schools as well?
I hear a question. Can I jump in? Is that okay? So you asked what helps, and I have to say, you guys are helping. One thing that was really interesting is I came in front of this committee about 7 or 8 years ago, with a school from NFI, capital T school, and we talked to the group, and it was the first time that this group really realized that therapeutic schools were governed in the same bucket as independent schools. And the eyes were wide in that meeting. This is about 7, 8 years ago. And since then, when rules and come down, there is an awareness that therapeutic schools are part of the independent school community, and you do discern between them. And that's been incredibly helpful, that you see us both as independent schools, but you see the missions differently and kind of treat them a little bit uniquely. And so that has been incredibly helpful. At that same time, we also became eligible for safety grants and things like that weren't available prior. And so I think there's been a lot of help offered by this committee and the legislature in that way. What can harm us? I mean, the job is very hard. And so allowing us to kind of focus on the job and have supportive partners at the Agency of Education is very helpful. I absolutely have a fantastic relationship with the folks at the AOE. They help guide us for all the difficult things, and they're just a great resource. So I just want to keep encouraging what you do for us, and hopefully that continues. One thing that Joe talked about that I think is interesting to watch is at Kindle Farm, kids will have behaviors that are unsafe or commit do certain things that need accountability. And we believe in accountability. It doesn't look like discipline at Kindle Farm. Kids are not suspended routinely. We do not use punishment. And so what we do to have accountability is meet with kids when they're re-regulated, meet with their educational teams, and we share power with the individual student and the group. And we don't have to, if a kid swears at me, they're not going to get suspended. That is often something that maybe in a public school, they could find a behavior and then force the school to kind of follow disciplinary procedures. And they're really working that procedure to get out of accountability by not being in school, to not be in the classroom when they do these behaviors. And so we are able to retool that process so that they do find accountability. And I think that that's probably one of the harder things to mimic in a public school. This idea that an adjacent program, which I am all supportive of doing in public schools, we have a waiting list we cannot accommodate. We want to help schools. As an HCRS person and as a Kindle Farm person, we would like to help schools do better at this. But that is a very difficult task because it's not just changing one classroom, it's changing the response to these behaviors across the continuum, which can be difficult. In my 29 years here, I've seen schools try to pull these programs back, and they should, and I'm supportive of that. What I've noticed is that they're often in rooms not designated as classrooms. They're in the basement near the boiler room. They're in these environments that kind of say less than, troubled. You could put your own value judgment on that. But for me, it's very important that the school program is tailored for them, is designed to meet their needs, and doesn't put forth a pathology of less than and things like that. So, yeah, those are some thoughts about what you've done to help, what could harm, and how to replicate.
Thanks. Good questions.
I had a therapeutic school in my district and they closed. And I often wondered, where those kids went.
Right.
So and my question is, do you have any capacity to absorb any additional students? That each one of them had a unique situation that was somewhat involved in the school. And one family packed up and left is what you provide is so unique and important that they're going to seek you out. I think the families that.
Yeah, they do. Is that a question specifically for Maple Hill?
Because I don't know how many therapeutic schools there are in the state.
Right now, we have a pretty substantial waiting list, and so does everybody else. And so what happens is the schools in the area can't really even be that selective about which school they prefer because we're all different. We don't do the same things in the same way. And so one is likely to work better for a particular student. But public schools are so desperate that they just get a student on like 5 different waiting lists, and the first opening, it's the one that they grab. And so I think there's a need for more individualized education. And what I was going to say in response to Keisha's question is that I come from a public school background. I spent over 40 years in public schools, and the majority of that time was as a special educator or special ed administrator, and then I became a superintendent. But the reality is that the more effective the public school classroom is, the less you have to resort to special education, whether it's therapeutic schools or just getting kids onto IEPs. That has to do with kids not being successful. And so when there's only so much money to go around, the dilemma is, where can you put your money in regular ed so that it's serving the most number of students the best? And there'll always be outliers. So who does that leave as the outliers? And how much money does it take to provide them with an appropriate education so that they're actually progressing? And I've seen it go, I've seen it swing back and forth. So even before multi-tiered system of support, when I came to Montpelier in 1980, no, that's sorry, 1998, it was the second highest spender in the state for special education. And I was hired to bring that down. And what people learned, the work was helping kids to be more successful in the classroom by training teachers to do many of the things that kids needed in the classroom so that they wouldn't fail and they wouldn't have to be special ed eligible. And we cut child count in half without reducing test scores. Then MTSS came along, and it's the right thing to do. MTSS is the right thing to do because it identifies responsibility for public schools to serve the greatest number of students possible. But when you see a group of students that have similar characteristics, rather than saying, we're going to take your money and put it here so that you can be here, the question is, what is it that these students need that they can't get in the public school right now? And can we change that? And for a lot of these students, it's really about numbers of others. The kids can't be around a lot of other kids and a lot of other adults. They can't manage all those social interactions. But if we can create a continuum like Drew is talking about, where people are ready to receive students coming back and they have options for them so they don't go away and never come back, I think that's a really important piece to study. And one of the things that worries me right now with what we're hearing about the future is that some of the changes probably are based on larger populations. So when you have a lot more kids, you can have, more classes of specialized kids, specialized this way, specialized that way, specialized this way. But right here in Vermont, we've moved away from that. So we started special classes up in Berrytown when schools like the Green Mountain School closed. And that was novel at the time. I taught the multi-handicap class there. But it wasn't too long before they started bringing those students back into the public school with additional training and additional resources in the public school. And, things have evolved since then. But just creating a place for them to go and never come back because they're different isn't something that we should do again.
That's why I asked the question, because I think what part of our job should be you can't throw a switch. These children exist. They all have different needs and situations, but if we could somehow build capacity, knowing that they're out there, and you can have X number of them, and maybe in your program build capacity, what would you need to do that?
Public schools need to have money for training that's put in the right places. That's what I think.
So what's the annual tuition for a student?
So students will come to Maple Hill tuition under two agreements. One is they're in part of what we call the small group program. That's $95,000 a year tuition. And if you come with a one-on-one, so any of our students, about half of our students, all tuitioned at the rate of a one-to-one rate. And that right now we are charging $105,000 per year. So I just want to know that obviously with the rate setting and, just a big kudos to Deborah and Pat Alice Gray, who do an amazing job. We have been approved for a higher level. I think our max rate for a student with a one-on-one is 136. So I just want to kind of share that we understand the impacts that these monies coming out of the public school coffers are is really important for us, and being, really fiscally responsible, saying like we're not here just to charge the main amount that we can. We said what is the bare minimum that we can maintain a great program, have great services and supports for our kids. And we're not here to be like, cool, we got our max, let's just max out our amount. So yeah, we anticipate us another small, about a 9% increase for next year as well, but it still is below our approved maximum rate from the state. So yeah.
So, Senator, next question.
Thanks, sir. So, really good testimony. It's fascinating. It's opening up a whole new window.
Yeah, thank you.
So you have waiting lists, which basically means that based on capacity, some students don't come in, or maybe they're delayed, or maybe they don't ever get in. But is the moratorium on new independent schools affecting schools like you? Or schools in your
I mean,
community?
it's not affecting us personally.
Not personally,
No.
but a person, affecting the
The
kids. that
pool
can
of
use their- Yeah, the
students that need
Yeah.
specialized attention.
So from a Vermont perspective, oh, I'm behind you, huh, Joe? See, I see what's going on. Sorry about that. So I also sit on the Vermont Independent School Association Executive Committee. And so this is stuff I'm pretty well aware of. Yeah. I mean, the moratorium includes therapeutic schools. And so we are not going to see a new therapeutic school open with that happening and until that changes. Now, Kindle Farm, I've approached them because we're an existing school. If I wanted to open another campus, I would be allowed to do that. It is a very dicey time because we've been actively thinking about that for 3 or 4 years. And it would be a $2 million investment to buy a building, get it to code, and we don't have any guaranteed placements or partnerships, or if things change in the educational landscape, the students could just dry up. So it's not a great environment to take the risk to start a new school with all the change that's in the air. The things I would kind of want to say is, one piece of our job is to reduce costs on the public school. We have seen the voting this year. We know property taxes. We see the governor's proposals. That all makes sense to us. So we are very aware of the price people are paying for education and special education. At Kindle Farm, we are able to leverage Medicaid. And so that allows us, for those kids that we are able to leverage Medicaid, to reduce tuition, which brings down the cost on the public school system. That's not all of the kids, but that is some of the kids. We also provide Medicaid services that the public school can then recoup. And so we fill out Medicaid logs for every public school we serve. We can't double dip. If we're billing Medicaid, then the public school can't. And we give them a price break on those kids. And when they are paying with special education money, then they are allowed to bill Medicaid to draw that down. So that's very important for us. We also, have 4 special educators working here. We're able to work on the IEPs, which is a legal document that binds the school district that sends us kids. They're responsible for the IEP. We're responsible for implementing it, but they take all of we do a lot of that work before those meetings to give them reasonable goals to evaluate student progress, so that those special ed case managers that have giant caseloads have to think about a little bit less when they're working with Kindle Farm, because we try to do the bulk of that work.
Senator Weeks.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up, if I could. So what inhibits, and I don't want to kind of create an alarm or anything, but what inhibits the public schools from creating a partner school, maybe even a competitor school to what you're doing? Why isn't this in the public sector?
Well, it is. First of all, these schools do have that. And, there's a recent BOCES bill that allows some, consolidation so they can do this. And I know my neighboring school district is looking at a BOCES type school for elementary students, and we are all for it. But it is hard work to find the staff in this environment. Special educators are very hard to find. Just general entry level staff that want to work with kids in a trauma informed environment. Um, this can be burnout work, and is a big, one of my biggest roles is to make this a healthy place to work. So the kids are coming with this trauma, it's spilling out. They can talk aggressively or violently to our staff. We need to have part of our day dedicated to our staff to process this information, to get supervision, to improve their plans in their work, professional development, and it is nonstop continuous. So when I think about what I would do if I was an administrator in a public school environment, how to replicate a healthy culture that's adaptable to the kind of things that the staff would see. Um, I've worked in public school, like it's not quite there yet. The stuff that we're seeing is pretty intense, and we have the ability to kind of process that with our clinical teams, with our board certified behavior analysts and things like that to really support staff to be able to stay in this work long term. And then if we're lucky, and we are, and we're doing a good job, then staff get rewarded by seeing their students have success and adapt new skills and go back to public school and have healthy relationships. And so we need all these kind of components to make a school have longevity. But I do think there's good work in the public school system doing that. And, one of our business models is how can we help them do that? I think no matter how much we help, there's always going to be room for Kindle Farm. So there's no sense of competition from me at all, because we want schools to be able to handle more than they can. And we think they have the tools to do it.
So you're trying to get it.
Well, I would agree with everything that Drew just said. I think that part of the reason that public schools don't do it is that they don't have the capacity. They don't even have the capacity in their administrator, because trying to figure out, if you're a special ed administrator in a school district, let's say, you're responsible for preschool special education, elementary, middle school, high school, kids who need, school to work initiatives. It's a vast job. And I did a lot of different jobs when I was in public systems, and I say the hardest job, even I was a superintendent, I say the hardest job was being a special ed director. Because what you deal with, unless you have like a project that's going to bring you joy, like I did in Montpelier, you're dealing with everybody's unsolvable problems. So they come to you, and the teacher couldn't solve it, and the principal couldn't solve it, and the assistant superintendent couldn't solve it. And so now it's with you, the special ed director, and you got to solve it. You have to have a solution. And it's really, really hard. But I also would agree with what Drew said about the staff support. The jobs are very intense. And people don't necessarily get to take a break. They might have a scheduled break, but a student needs them and they can't have their break. And we do a lot to build a healthy culture in our school. Just this week, I sent out a short little email to one set of staff because the kids are doing well, and it's one of the hardest groups of kids. And I just sent them out a little note. Kudos. I know kids are doing so well, and it's all because of you. But they have time to process. They have a way to process. They have people who are there to process with them. And it's just really a lot more than what one administrator can wrap their head around. I would say that. And also the skills that the practitioners need are very unique. And as Drew said, they have to be honored and built upon constantly. So they might have it figured out for this kid, but then we get two more. What? How do they work with these kids? And so it's a really intense job.
The level of skills that, so a classroom assistant in a public school versus a classroom assistant at Kindle Farm, especially one that's been here a little while. Our interventionists have all this re-regulation, co-regulation, skill building. That kind of seems like what everyone would expect from a behavior school. That doesn't seem like a surprise. But what is clear to me is that my staff have deep training in literacy and vocabulary development because many of our kids are coming not reading. So these classroom assistants in public school called paraprofessionals, in our school, they're adept at literacy intervention, math intervention, writing intervention, on top of the behavioral things. Because if we're not helping momentum in the class and removing the cognitive load that causes the dysregulation through sound academic practices, then just behavior mod alone won't work. Yeah, so it's a pretty complex skill profile there for our staff.
So,
Just a question, the therapeutic school that closed in my district, they can't remember if they were a nonprofit and the new owner wanted to become a for-profit. Well, it triggered a reevaluation process with AOE, and they just decided to fold up their tent and go away. So are you guys nonprofit?
Yeah, we've been nonprofits since
Okay.
incorporated in 16.
so,
Nonprofit as well.
so as we wrap up here, help us understand give us a sense of the magnitude of the need. I know you both have waiting lists, and my sense is that there are parts of the state with some access and probably some other parts of the state without reasonable access. Can you help us understand that landscape a little bit?
I think the best context is for me over the long period of time. And, I think there's a lot of references saying, yeah, this is a COVID, the intensity, and how much happened since COVID and the increased level of needs. But in Maple Hill for 22 years, it's been solid, minus one small period of time, maybe 18 years ago, where schools were opening up their own and trying their own in-house, and many of them still there and successful in their own ways. But, to assess need, it almost becomes hard to really accurately assess, because it's a constant cycle of, LEAs checking in with us. Do you have any room? Sorry, no, we're moving in. And like Martha said earlier, they move on if there is an option at all. So for us, this need is not just immediate. This is kind of a historic need for these therapeutic schools. Vermont, our waiting list has been there for years. And wish we could get them all, but you can't, just.
Do you have a sense that if the moratorium as it relates to therapeutic schools were following up on that question from Senator Weeks, if it were removed, that there would be interest in are other people out there who would be interested in opening up, especially in parts of the state that don't have access now? Do you have any sense of that?
Absolutely. I mean, usually I've been reached out to by multiple folks outside of our, kind of our area that we serve. It's like, hey, what can you tell us? We're really interested in opening up a similar program. We have experience. I've talked to a student that used to go to Maple Hill and was really inspired. They have resources, they have great staff, and it really, and they have what I understand, a good sense of like something that's really scalable, and starting small. And and then there's some missing opportunities. I wish we could, again, they're not competing for the same kids at the same time, but finding these little different nooks and crannies throughout the state that kids are underserved. So yeah, I think that moratorium, if it comes with a great definition, obviously we don't want to throw the floodgates open and, everybody can apply to be open, without really, clear criteria of what are we expecting and what is defining these schools, or what are the systems or supports in place of schools to be called therapeutic. 'Cause it's almost like that word has gotten so watered down, it almost doesn't mean anything anymore. And like as a kind of official definition, even if somebody's worked there, I'm still not sure what that really means, very clearly in a way. And so, that would be really interesting to say, there is that separation for the folks that are like, hey, I'm here to create more profit and get a little bit of the piece of this pie versus like, no, that is, I want to say that the mindset is different. Well, it can be, the motivation can be different, but really defining the skills that we're looking at within how is the state really defining therapy? What are the supports that need in place that we all can agree on? So yeah, and then I can actually hang my hat on like, we're a therapeutic school and that's what it means to everybody very clearly. That'd be tough. That's tough work to really nail that down. That's, again, you talked to, you got a picture of how kind of nebulous and kind of heart driven and individualized our work is. So it's really hard to, pin down something as, as wide as that. But did I answer your question?
Yeah,
One of the ways that I think it's something that I think is important to consider is that there will always be the 2 to 5% of the student body that is difficult, if not impossible, for public educators to educate. And that has changed over the years that I've been doing this. First it was students with multiple disabilities who were kind of new to the scene because with, different birthing procedures, more kids were living through the birthing process, but no one knew how to teach them. So that was, an initial population. And then who those 2 to 5% of the students are has changed in the 45 years since then. And it's changed again, I think, since COVID, because there were always kids who were hard to teach, but now there are kids who just don't show up physically or cognitively. They became socially anxious. They won't go into a setting. So I think the group is even different in the last 5 years, but in terms of funding and thinking about resources, there will always be, 2 to 5% of the student population that public schools are at a loss for how to educate.
well, thank you, all three of you for coming in. It was really, really informative. So thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for what you do.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we love what we do, and it's great to be able to talk to
Thank
you
you so much. Appreciate it.
Are adjourned.
Good luck.
So question I didn't put down, it sounds like, it sounds.
Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations.
Yeah, really good.
Maybe on, we go on.